Dialogue with Finland and Sweden, and it's their decision. But if they decide to apply, Finland and Sweden will be warmly welcomed and expect the process to go.
Well, let's get more analysis from Glenn Alexander Crowther, who joins me from Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Sweden and Finland, as we know, have a long history of wartime neutrality and staying out of military alliances. So why has that changed now? What would these two nations applying for NATO membership signify as far as a shift in policy?
Well, in the early 2000s, they created a solid relationship with NATO. There's now a special relationship called 30, the 30 NATO countries, 30 plus 2. And so they've already cozied up to NATO. But what changed now is the fact that the Russians, instead of just conducting political warfare in Eastern Europe, are now invading their neighbors. And so they've discovered, they've seen that Russia isn't invading the Baltic states or Poland. Their analysis is that it's because they're in NATO. And so they don't want to be next on the Russian list of interventions.
Can you give us a bit more background on Sweden and Finland and why they would be in particular concerned about Russia right now? Finland, for example, I know has actually lost territory to Russia in the past.
That's exactly right. Russia has invaded Finland twice in the 20th century, in 1940 and in 1945, taking Finnish territory both times. Finland only gained their independence in 1918 from Russia. Russia beat the Swedes in the Great Northern War and took Finland and made it a principality. And so they're very used to having aggressive Russian neighbors, and they want to do something about it.
So what would change if and when these countries become part of NATO? Would joining NATO really make them safer? And do you think NATO really is even relevant in this modern era?
Oh, NATO is more relevant than ever. As a matter of fact, Vladimir Putin has legitimized NATO significantly by his move in Ukraine and in other places, the frozen conflicts in places like Moldova and Georgia. And so what it does is it brings the security guarantee. You heard the Finnish Prime Minister talk about Article 5, that's the mutual defense guarantee, and it brings that to the fore. So when you attack Finland that's part of NATO, you're attacking 32 different countries if they're in the alliance. Who will not mess around. NATO is much stronger than Russia will ever be, and the Russians know that.
So do you think these countries will be allowed into the group, and what exactly is the application process like as far as how long will it take?
So the application process usually takes quite a bit of time because there are significant reforms that a typical country has to do. They have to be a democratic country. The military has to be subordinate to civilian control. They have to respect human rights. They have to respect minorities, things like that. But as we know, the Finns and the Swedes are world leaders in all of those aspects. So they've met all the criteria. Another set of criteria is interoperability, using the same ammunition, the same size gas nozzles, things like that. And the Swedes and the Finns are totally interoperable with NATO based on Finnish and Swedish armaments policies that date back decades. And so they've met all the criteria already. They just have to apply for it. And then what has to happen, NATO itself will move very quickly, but then all 30 of the NATO countries have to accept them. So it's a treaty. So like in the United States, the Senate would have to ratify Finland and Sweden coming into NATO. After the 30 members have ratified it, then Finland and Sweden would have to change their legal codes and sign the treaty.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Glenn Alexander Crowther joining me from Washington, D.C. Thank you.